Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment here. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay. We'll get started. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Jajuan Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to this first installment of our Summer Sankofa series, a trilogy of genealogy workshops hosted by the Lemon Project. Since our first workshop in February, I've connected with some of you who have either started your research or building on your research project, and I'm excited to have you part of this research community that we're building. Throughout this presentation, I encourage you to submit your questions in the chat, and we'll ensure that they are answered. Also, we will periodically place links on information that you may find helpful. We have experienced genealogists here as well, so feel free to use the chat to post comments, post about your upcoming events or other helpful resources. The purpose of these workshops is to really gain new skills and information to help you in delving deeper into your family history research. So 2 weeks following the workshops, we will have a show and tell session to follow up on the questions from this workshop and to show where you can show examples of how you've applied the lessons that are learned. As previously stated, genealogy research is best done in a community. So we want to really create that space for this type of exchange. So on tomorrow, you'll receive an email with the details about that 1-hour session that will take place via Zoom on June the 25th at 6 p.m. and it'll last for about an hour. Where we'll just kind of discuss and have some exchange in terms of our findings. Also, to create a little fun, I want to encourage you to wear your family reunion t-shirt or community or church or class reunion shirt, or you can post a photo of your family or organization on your profile photo for your Zoom. I may invite you to briefly share a bit about that experience because we want these sessions to be a little bit, interactive. But without further ado, I want to introduce our guest speakers for tonight. We have 2 wonderful speakers who have been with us previously with the National Museum of African American History, Robert F. Smith Explore Your Family History Center. We have Hannah Scruggs, who is a WM alum, and she has works with the Center there for Genealogy Research at the National Museum of African American History. She's a Central Virginia native, graduated from with an MA in Public History from North Carolina State University and a BA in History from William & Mary. Her research and professional interests include slavery, descendant communities, and African American environmental history. Our second host is Lisa Crawley, who is a genealogy reference assistant. She has served as a resource center manager of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore and as an administrator at the Montgomery County Historical Society in Rockville. She's a native of Elizabeth, New Jersey. Her research interests include antebellum era African American history of the Mid-Atlantic and Upper South, and also Methodist history. She holds a BA in economics from Drew University, as well as an MA in museum studies from Hampton University. Tonight, we're going to be engaged in a wonderful workshop where we will take a look at a case study using the Freedman Bureau records. This presentation is called Records of Intrigue. And again, thank you tonight for joining us. And let's give a virtual applause to our presenters for the evening.
Thank you so much, Jajuan. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's wonderful to be back with the Lemon Project at William & Mary. Our program today is entitled Genealogy and Records of Intrigue. In today's program, we're going to explore a case of reverse genealogy. where we're starting with a family in the post-Civil War era, and then we're going to trace that family tree into the 20th and 21st century. So if you ever need to do this kind of research, we hope that today's program will serve as a template to guide you. As genealogists and researchers and writers, community historians, librarians, wherever you come from, we all run across intriguing records, ones that will spark an interest, curiosity, and fascination, and that just won't let us go. It can also be a record that will provide a breakthrough, taking you to your next level of research. In working with our guests at the museum, some of the intriguing records that we've encountered, including discovering Civil War ancestors. For another family, it was finding records that indicated the family actually had a different surname at the turn of the century than the one that they were currently using. It could also be a record that identified a relative who died at an early age and whose memory may have been lost in the family's oral history. Whatever record, an intriguing record will pull at your heartstrings and hold your attention. So our story today comes from the Freedmen's Bank record of Holland Brooks. Holland Brooks was a spinner, a domestic worker, an enslaved mother of 10 children from Eastern North Carolina, who at the age of 78 applied for a Freedmen's Bank record. What makes her story and the Freedmen's Bank record so intriguing is that it reveals what happened to her family during slavery. This record is a great lesson in the importance of always carefully reading the original record and not just relying on the digitized record. And Hannah is going to go into detail with that in just a bit. This record will also give us a great arc of history on Holland Brooks' family. It will identify her parents, who we know were born probably in the 18th century, possibly around the period of the American Revolution. And then it will bring us up to the family history in terms of Holland's own children, including a son, William Brooks, who served during the Civil War. In tracing Holland's story, some of the records that we'll be going over today, besides the Freedmen's Bank record, includes a records from the Freedmen's Bureau, a North Carolina Cohabitation Record, US Federal Census records and vital records, and a legacy.com memorial webpage. So as we celebrate Juneteenth this week, we're asking you to ask yourself, where are you in your research? And what other records can help you trace freedom's first generation, the generation of African Americans who were born during slavery and who lived to see emancipation? So I'd like to share a little bit of background about the Freedmen's Bank itself. The bank had some 37 branches in 17 states, mostly southern states, but there were also branches in Philadelphia and New York. At its peak, it had about 70,000 depositors. The bank essentially had a twofold purpose. First, it served as a financial institution for the back pay and bounties of Civil War veterans. And secondly, it served as an institution that offered financial services for the newly freed population throughout the South. On the slide in front of you is a picture of the DC branch of the Freedmen's Bank. And when we think about the state of Virginia, you will find 3 Freedmen's Bank branches, including Norfolk, Richmond, and Lynchburg. And if you've ever been in downtown Richmond, you may have seen a historic marker for the branch in Richmond. Freedmen's Bank accounts can be very rich with genealogy information for any given family and on their depositors. And this is especially true for the record collections of Eastern North Carolina. So some of the general categories that are covered on Freedmen's Bank records include the name of the depositor, where the person was born, where they were currently living at the time of their application, how old they were, their complexion, and important family information, identifying spouses, children, and parents, as well as a signature or possibly an endorsement with an X. Some deposit books also included information, detailed information on Civil War soldiers, identifying their regiments, as well as the names of their slave owners and their former plantations. So we'd like you to ask the question, is the Freedmen's Bank collection for you? So again, you would have to be back in terms of tracing your family tree, preferably back to the 1880 or 1870 census. You need to ask yourself, did your family live in a major Southern city where the bank existed? But it also included records of those adjoining communities as well. So for instance, here in the DMV, not only did it include records for families who lived in the district, but it also included a lot of records for families in Prince George's County and Montgomery County as well. Also, are you a descendant of a Civil War soldier? Again, you may find records for Civil War descendants as well. But we also found records of people who traveled at that time. So by chance, if you have any people on your family tree who were traveling preachers, particularly with the AME Church, you may find records on them. And we've even found records of Chesapeake Bay watermen from Maryland who had records in other states, including North Carolina. So keep some of those people in mind as well. So how can you access the Freedmen's Bank collection? You can access it readily on ancestry.com. If you access it through familysearch.org, one way of doing that is to go to the main page and then under Find a Collection, type in the word United States, and then scroll down until you see the Freedmen's Bank collection. If you're already in the main search engine, though, on Family Search, the Freedmen's Bank records will not automatically appear. Again, it is a record collection that you will have to select. And then on Heritage Quest is actually located on the main page. So you'll see it right in front of you and you won't have to do anything. Hannah will take over from here.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So we'll go ahead and get into the story, our case study for today, the story of Holland Brooks. So this is her digitized Freedmen's Bank records. We can see that it lists her name, her sex, her age, an estimated birth year, and birthplace, as well as the names of her parents and her children and spouse. So we know from using databases that not everything is included in the digitized document. So we want to make sure that we take a closer look, and we will see that on the next slide. Yes, so here we have the actual Freedmen's Bank record itself. So if you have access to, or if you find a Freedmen's Bank record for a family member, or if you're doing research for someone else and they have a Freedmen's Bank record that matches a family member, this is what most of them look like, where it gives us their, again, a lot of the same information from the digitized record, but we have some details that are not included on the digitized record. So we have living status of her children that's included here, where it says children. You can see some writing above it. We're going to show you on the next slide. We digitized it and transcribed it ourselves, but this is one of the reasons why it is so important to look at the actual record itself, because there are these notes that are sometimes not transcribed or included in the official transcription that we get from these databases. So if we can go to the next slide, we can talk through what we find out from this record. So we can see where she was born. She was born near the Tar River, near Pitt County. And her residence was 5 miles from Johnson's Mill. So these are very, very detailed records. They really give us really this type of information that we don't always get from other types of records that we look at from the census, from birth, marriage, and death records, things like that. We have her occupation at this time as spinning and housework, and we have her age as 78. And if this is during the late 1860s, that makes her born right around the turn of the century. It says her husband is Isaac Bell, but that he's been dead for many years. And then we have the names of her children. So we have Rachel, she's listed as dead. Sally is listed as sold. Reuben is listed as a boy and then dead. So we can assume that he may have died as a child, which is very sad. Benjamin sold as well. And then we have Emily. It seems that she's still living and that Holland may know her whereabouts. We have William, who died in the army. We have Greer, who came with her to the bank. We have Lewis, Alvina, and Lemon. And then we can understand from this that she's putting money from William, from her son who died in the army, in the bank. It lists her father's name, Ned Adams. It says he's died before she was grown, as well as her mother's name, Rachel, who died when she was a baby, and the name of her sibling, Reuben Adams. So this is a heartbreaking record. We learn a lot about the tragedy of Holland's life, the sad things that happened to her family because of slavery and other just tragic incidents as well. But we get so much from the Freedmen's Bank records, offer so much of this information that we don't often get from other types of records, right? We may be able to infer that someone has passed because they don't show up in the next census or because we find their death record. But this really spells out exactly people's knowledge of their families and children in this crucial period shortly after emancipation. And if we look at the next slide, again, this is just going over more of the things that we learned from this record, as well as some questions that we have from it. So another more big picture thing is that it identifies 3 generations of her family. It lists the statuses of her children, as we talked about. It lists where the money in her bank account was from his military service. Some things that we might note if this was someone in our family that we were researching. If Holland's mother, Rachel, died when she was a baby, then who raised Holland? If Holland's parents were born in the mid 1700s, which generation would they have been in the United States? Where does Holland's surname Brooks come from? It said that her parents' last names were Adams and that her husband, who's deceased, his last name was Bell. So we don't know where Brooks is coming from. So these are some questions that we would put in our research log to further our research and the types of things that we would maybe want to know more about. So then we can go to the next slide. So this is a record that helps us to connect Holland to the Freedmen's Bank and with her son, William. So this is the Freedmen's Bureau record for New Bern, North Carolina, for William Brooks being in the 35th U.S. Colored Infantry. And the Freedmen's Bureau helped freedmen receive back pay or pensions for their service in the Civil War. So we see that he received $126 for his service in March of 1870. And it says Holland Brooks, his mother, is listed below as the person who would have received the payment because he, as we know, was killed in combat in the war. So we'll go to the next record, learn a little bit about the U.S. 35th Colored Infantry. The original name was the 1st North Carolina Colored Volunteers. They took on enlistments from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, and they trained in New Bern, North Carolina. They were in the Battle of Olustee, the largest Civil War battle in Florida. And so learning this information can give us more background about Holland's son, William, We know that we're not going to see him on any census records in 1870 or 1880, but understanding the context of his regiment and his military service helps give us more background, helps us understand more of this story. And we'll go to the next slide. And so we have another record here that we're connecting. We can connect to Holland Brooks, which is a cohabitation record. And cohabitation records are records that document marriages of freed people that took place during slavery. Really, really rich collection of records. We have 7 states that have cohabitation collections, including Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. 20,000 records survive just for North Carolina. In Virginia, if you're doing research in Virginia, the Library of Virginia has a large collection of cohabitation records as well for the state of Virginia. And so we see this from the Pitt County Courthouse. Before me, the Pitt County Clerk of the Court of Pleas and Quarter Session for said county personally appeared Luke Pittman and Holland Brooks, residents of said county, likely slaves but now emancipated, and acknowledged that they do cohabitate together as man and wife, that said cohabitation commenced on the 10th day of June in 1850. So by this point, it's 1866. They've been together for 16 years. This person is named Luke Pittman. It's not Ned Adams, like we saw, or sorry, not Ned Adams, Isaac Bell, like we saw in the prior record. So this gives us another dimension to Holland's story, something else that we might wonder about. She went to the courthouse with this man and said, we've been together since 1850. But was she married to Isaac before that? Again, some more questions. But this is another document at this point, this time period during Reconstruction that is very helpful in building our understandings of our families and our ancestors right after, in that period, right after emancipation and their lives during slavery. So we'll go on to the next slide. And we're moving into Holland's family, the longevity of Holland, the censuses that she appears on. So in the 1900 and 1910 census, the 1900 census is the last census that Holland will appear on. But here we've pulled out some of, or the pieces of the census that show her family. So you can see on the left, we have Holland is listed as the mother of Lemuel Pittman. We saw Lemon or Lemuel on that Freedman's bank document. So we can connect those two documents to each other. She's living with him as his mother. And then in 1910, we don't see Holland, so we can assume that she passes sometime between 1900 and 1910. And he is living with his wife and children. And we could use any of his children to trace that family further into the future, because we found Lemuel. We can use his children, Holland's grandchildren, to bring us even further into the 20th century and even into the 21st century. So we can go to the next slide. We have the digitized copy of the 1900 census. We see here Holland's listed as being in her 90s, and then she's highlighted in yellow, listed as the mother of Lemuel Pittman or Lemon Pittman. And you can also see the other family members that are living in the household, as well as his wife and children. So again, we always want to look at the document, not just rely on the transcription. And here we have, this is the 1910 census, the blown up 1910 census, and we have him listed as Lemon and not Lemuel, but we can tell that it's the same person. His wife's name is the same. And we have his children. We see there are more children that are born in that time period as well. And we're looking at Ernest Pittman is going to be the person that we're paying attention to going into the future. So you can go to the next slide. And so here we have a death certificate for Lewis Pittman. He, if we remember from the Freedman's bank record, he was also one of Holland's children. And we have the names of his parents there. We see Luke Pittman and Holland Brooks. We see the cohabitation record. We make that connection between those two people and this Lewis Pittman. and he's 81 when he passes, and it gives us the year of his death and the year of his birth. So this is, again, an important document. It helps us to connect these dots, and it gives us another route. So we're not just necessarily relying on Lemuel or Lemon's kids to take us into the future, but we have this Ernest Pittman here as well that we could search his family too. If we can go to the next slide. And here, okay, so going back to Ernest, Lemon's son, Holland's grandson, we have found him in the 1940 census. And we see him living with his wife along with several children. We've chosen Lillian Pittman. We'll see in just a second. We can take her into the future, but she's 6 years old, born in North Carolina in 1934. So, showing up in this last census that we have access to for the next year. And we can use any of these kids. We're choosing Lillian, but we can use any of these children as well to take us into the future. Obviously, we can't, this is our last census, but using other things like city directories that we may have access to later into the future, as well as Google, we can hopefully make a connection with these children as well. And then we have, this is the death certificate for Ernest Pittman, another record that we have in tracing this family further into the future. We have where he lived. We have the name of his father is Lemon Pittman. Again, this other document confirming this connection. His wife is Jeanette James, which we saw confirmed in the censuses, and his birth date and where he lived, Pitt County. Pitt County is the same place where his mother lived. And then we have a connection with the undertaker information. So if you can see at the bottom, that helps us identify the current undertakers in Ayden, North Carolina, which will lead us to the next slide for his daughter, Lillian Pittman Dixon, who's the daughter of Ernest. We are able to identify her legacy.com page, but through the information that we know about undertakers in the area by looking at their records and looking at obituaries. And she passed quite recently. So this is the great-great-granddaughter of Holland Brooks. So daughter of Ernest Pittman, granddaughter of Lemuel Pittman, great-granddaughter of Holland, and then great-great-granddaughter of Rachel and Ned Adams. Go to the next slide. Yeah. So as you can see, we can use these records that records of intrigue, these records that tell these really in-depth stories to go further into our family research, ones that we don't always think about. And right now we're gonna tell you about our community curation platform, which allows you to share some of your family stories. So this is another part of the work that our team does is digitizing information, digitizing people's documents and photos. And we have a platform that people can upload their documents and photographs and family stories. And we encourage you to participate if that is of interest to you. It can be a way of connecting with others over family stories. And as genealogists and family researchers, we know how much we like to share the stories of our families with others. The next slide. We also work with the Freedmen's Bureau Transcription Project. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the project, but the museum is working to transcribe all of the Freedmen's Bureau documents. So many of them exist and are digitized, but they're not transcribed yet. So if you are interested, we will put the link in the chat so you can sign up and get involved if that's also something that interests you. And then our current digital exhibit that our team has worked on is Polly Murray's Proud Shoes, a classic in African-American genealogy. The book Proud Shoes by Polly Murray was one of the first, and maybe the first, African-American genealogy book. It came out 20 years before Roots. And Murray was such an amazing person and did so much in their life. that we have dedicated an online and in-person exhibit to them. And so we would love it if you visited. We can also put the link to that in the bio, or not in the bio, wow. Link to that in the chat so that you can take a look at that as well. And then we have some resources here where you can find the records that we mentioned. And we will put those in the chat before we sign off as well. So you will have access to those too. And we thank you so much for coming to our presentation. To sign up for any virtual sessions, if you're interested, you can go email us at familyhistorycenter@si.edu, and Lisa and I will get back to you. And we can answer questions. If you just have questions, we're happy to answer research questions, as well as set up sessions to help with research. And thank you so much. And now if you all have questions, we are here to discuss.
In addition to that, Hannah, I was going to say, if anyone has any intriguing records in their own research that they would like to share this evening, please feel free to share that information with us.
Yes,
We'd like
we'd love to hear it
as well.
Hi, I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I found I believe she's my great grandmother on my father's side, her 1880 census from South Carolina. So I just want to make sure I understand about, you mentioned 2 census dates. So with those 2 census, 1870, 1880,
mm-hmm.
those would be the ones where you would most likely find more information about those individuals at the Freedmen's Bureau or Freedmen's Bank Bureau?
Yeah, in both of those, in both the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen's Bank Records, there are 2 different sets of documents, though related, that was the same time period. You're more likely to find people who are adults in the 1870 and 1880 census in either of those record sets, just based on their age, yes. And then based on location. In the beginning, we talked about how the Freedmen's Bank was in 17 states. I think there were 35 branches, Lisa, 37 branches. Something like that.
Right.
And so, yes.
So does it matter? Well, if they have to be near a larger city, is it more likely versus a rural area? Because it mentions cities, but Meriwether, Edgefield, South Carolina, doesn't sound like large cities.
So I think it depends on it. It depends if they have a traveling profession. They might be more likely, even if they live in a rural area, to open a Freedmen's Bank account. And if they live in a rural area that's near a city, then you would check that city, their Freedmen's Bank records for that city.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
and
that.
Check the Freedmen's Bureau records, though, because the Freedmen's Bureau set up field offices all over the country, including and especially in rural areas.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, and just one other thing, if you Google like Freedmen's Bank branch locations, those citations will identify all the branches across the various 17 states. And then you can then identify if any of your ancestors may have lived near one, either in the city or directly outside the city.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. This is really helpful. We appreciate your work you're doing.
If someone has a question, you can just go ahead and ask it, because I can't see everybody. I see we have a lot of participants. So, yes. And if you see anything, or Jajuan, let me know.
Absolutely, yes.
Can we remove the slide?
If you stop sharing your screen, yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. There we go.
Oh, all these beautiful faces.
Hi, Lisa. It's Karen K. Bowen. Long time no see.
Hey there. Hey, thank you for all your emails.
You're welcome. Listen, I just put the link in for the mapping of the Freedmen's Bureau in case anyone needed it. And it shows all the field hospitals, the hospitals, and things like that. And it has all the different documents.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now, you said that was the mapping of the Freedmen's Bureau.
Right.
Not the bank.
Right.
Mapping of the Freedmen's Bureau.
The
Okay.
Bureau. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
And also, if you would like to type your question in the chat room, we'll field that for you.
Oh,
Feel free to also speak if you have a question. We also have a hand raise feature that you can use as well, so that we can ensure that everyone's question is answered. I think we have some questions indeed. Okay. Also, there's a question. How did you decide to follow Lillian?
How did we decide to, I'm sorry?
To follow Lillian. To
follow Holland. You know, so long story short, it was a record that I just came across by chance a number of years ago when I was working in Baltimore. And when I had seen most bank records before, you know, the clerks had basically just filled in the information that was asked for, you know, name, age, location, who their family members were. But when I saw some of these records for Eastern North Carolina, I started seeing these other notations. And then when I looked at hers and saw that they actually stated that she had all these children who were sold, and you know, what happens to some of her other family members, I was like, oh my God, you know. And so then it made me wonder, like, two things came to mind was, you know, did she just share this? Obviously, we don't know this. Did she just share this information herself and the clerk just started recording it? Or possibly did the clerk just begin to ask her more questions about her children, you know? But, and so I would like actually to make this a larger story, because as we start going through more of these records, particularly for Eastern North Carolina, we see more of this detailed information filled in that you don't normally see on a lot of Freedmen's Bank records. And I started looking a little further into the person who I think was the bank clerk at that time. And it appears he was from the North. And so it made me wonder, like, what was his mindset? What was his attitudes towards African Americans? And it just gave me the feeling that he was really there to help people, you know? And yeah, so I was just very impressed with that body of records when I came across it. And when I went beyond her record as well.
Another question, is there any question on how the failure of the bank impacted Holland and her family?
I couldn't hear you. Hannah, could you hear him? Hannah, yeah,
can you
repeat it? I can't. Yeah, Jajuan, you kind of faded out.
Okay. Is there any information on how the failure of the Freedmen's Bank impacted Holland and her family?
Specifically, how the failure impacted Holland's family, no, but there's certainly information about the demise of the Freedmen's Bank itself. You know, they talk about how, you know, Frederick Douglass played such a huge role in trying to keep the bank going. But even with all of his lobbying efforts, he was not able to do that. So there's a lot of information about the general administration of the bank and then what happened, but not necessarily specifically how it affected specific families.
Okay.
But again, if you just do some searches, and we can share that information if you contact us. There have been other books about the Freedmen's Bank itself that have been written, like I say, over the last 15 years.
Did they have to have cash? Was cash required to open an account, or could they open an account in anticipation of a bounty or USCT pay?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to. So you'll have to hit me up on email and I'll try to find an answer for you. I mean, I'm assuming you would have to go there with cash, or, I mean, you know, with the money, or either have some record that, you know, stating, probably, I would think that even just a record stating that you were expecting this money probably would have been enough to open an account. But I can look further into that.
We have another question here. Well, there was a question about, was there a comprehensive list available for cohabitation records?
So I have seen cohabitation records. There's at least one online document that breaks it down by state. And
Yes.
then you can click and go into each. But in all honesty, I think that's something that still needs to be worked on and built, because it just kind of gives you links. And then you can go under, you can research each state that that record applies to. You know, Kentucky cohabitation, North Carolina, Virginia. The only thing about the cohabitation records are they weren't uniform. All the counties did not keep cohabitation records. So even when you find a given state, for instance, Virginia, you're not going to find cohabitation records for all the counties, or for North Carolina. It was really kind of, you know, luck of the draw, so to speak, as to what counties decided to create cohabitation records. But they certainly exist. They're out there, and it's certainly worth looking at.
We have another question before we go to someone who has their hand raised. This was, are Holland's, and I was interested in this question as well, are Holland's descendants aware of your work on their family?
So that's you want to tell them, Hannah? That's an ongoing conversation. They're actually not, but.
And we located Miss Dixon, Lillian Pittman Dixon, and haven't gone as far into some of the other descendants that may exist of Holland Brooks. So no, we haven't gotten in touch with them, but that is something that we want to do, and that we're interested in, you know, if we do find interesting records like this, providing the information that we find.
Yeah, it's because I even saw some of her relatives even actually live where I have family members from. My mom is from Eastern North Carolina. And I was like, oh man, because their last name Pittman. And it's funny, I was raised in Jersey, in Elizabeth. And when I look in terms of my own family history, there are so many kids who I went to school with whose families are from the same part of Eastern North Carolina, that, you know, there's this one kid, I'm wondering if he has any connection with that family.
We have a raised CBWN.
Yes, hi, it's me, Karen K. Bowen. Regarding cohabitation records, there are a lot of them within the Freedmen Bureau records. And the way you have to do is you have to figure out where your ancestors were, and then figure out which field office they might have gone to record their marriage. And sometimes they tell you if it's the first marriage, second marriage, and what kids they had with the previous spouse, as well as sometimes they list the children with the current spouse as well. So, and they also have the labor contracts there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we had another question. So if a person found out through tracing that they have a Civil War relative that had money that they never received, if they proved that they were related, could they actually, I guess, obtain this money that was due to that relative?
Yeah, I'm going over that again. Hold on 1 second, Hannah, if you want to jump in with that. I'm reading that again.
Yeah, I don't know what the process for that would be for getting, especially for the Civil War, going through pensions basically, or going through money they were owed from that time. Yeah, I'm not sure if the government is doing that.
Yeah, I would think are they actually thinking they're going to get money now? Is that how I'm reading?
Yeah, that's the question.
Oh, I mean, I would think a statute of limitations is over. I mean, I can't.
Yeah,
that'd be kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think a normal statute of limitations would cancel that.
Said, for you, Lisa, what counties in Eastern North Carolina is your family? This is
Wayne and Gates. Mostly Wayne and then like Lenore, Green, Yeah, Wayne, Lenore, and Green, which are like all there together. And then on my other grandmother's side, Gates County.
Okay. We have another question from someone who has their hand raised. Wynn.
I am a brand new newcomer to this kind of work. Through my father, who is still living at age 95, born in 1926, and his maternal line. I've started to link into the white ancestry in the family based in Winsboro, Winsboro, South Carolina, named McMaster. In these type of records, if I start doing research back into the McMasters, wondering on the history of enslaved people owned by those ancestors, is there any way through Smithsonian or other places that recovery of the Black ancestors and the white ancestors gets linked?
So through property records typically, and then those censuses, those 1870 and 1880 censuses, you'll often see those people living near each other. So formerly enslaved people living not too far away from where they may have been enslaved. On the 1870 census, there are 2 columns that also ask for value of real estate and value of personal property. So you can also get a sense of who some of the enslaving families might have been. So if that's information that you don't know at this moment, or at least depending on how much property and how much personal estate that they had, a sense of the size of a plantation, and whether or not they did enslave people or had a plantation. But there are lots of property records from the county level in Family Search. They're also in your local courthouses and historical societies. But Family Search has also digitized many records that are not transcribed. So it is a journey to sort of go through and find the county and look at the documents from the places where your ancestors may have lived. But there are actually many court documents, property records, wills, deeds, all sorts of things that do list enslaved people and link them to the people that enslaved them.
And I just want to add one more thing on to that. If in the case where you did have large plantation holders, if they have private family papers that may have been donated to a university, you can also check in historical collections for that. It's usually in the case where you have well-established families who have those papers. And I never forget, we had Lady Austin who came in, and she didn't have it with her, but she talked about a family journal, a journal that one of her ancestors had. And it mentioned the slaves, within the family journal. And so she had actually never done online research. And then I was showing her I found that the slave schedule for her ancestors that were slave holders. So to make that connection was certainly very helpful on that end for her.
Thanks so much.
Hey, Lisa.
Yes, who's that?
This is Leslie Anderson. Hi.
Hey, Leslie.
In regard to that question about ownership, it's also helpful for people to take a look at land ownership maps. I have used the Gilmore Maps in my own family research and in helping people who use my library. And that is something that is sometimes overlooked, because it does suggest relationships between the enslavers as neighbors and associates, and therefore, by extension, relationships between enslaved people on one property or on nearby properties.
The name of the map collection that you specifically mentioned, I know there's another map collection I'm thinking of, but can you give that name again, please?
Sure, it's called the Gilmore Maps. That's GIL.
I see it now, Gilmore Maps. Thank you, Shelley, for putting it in the chat.
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, Selma, thank you. Gilmore was an engineer for the Confederate Army, And these topographical maps show waterways, churches, sometimes cemeteries. And the reason these maps were created was because you're going to war, you need to know who your friends and who your enemies are in the neighborhood. So a number of them have survived. Reproductions are available for purchase. I think it's from the Virginia Historical Society, now the Virginia Museum for History and Culture. They're also online. They're digitized at the Library of Congress website.
That particular map collection will you find them throughout the South, or is it mostly, do they concentrate in a particular geographic region?
I know that they exist in Virginia.
So they're mostly for Virginia, okay.
And not all the counties in Virginia.
Okay.
I know that about 30 of them survived the war, but the Library of Congress website has some originals and they've digitized them.
I see, and someone, yeah, Renata, I see you wrote the Sanborn maps. Those that's what I was trying to think of. Those are the Sanborn maps are the ones I'm more familiar with. I had never heard of the Gilmore maps, but as you said, it's mostly Virginia. I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, and they're really helpful for rural areas,
right.
In particular. Right. Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
Jajuan, you're on mute.
Yeah, Jajuan. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Thank you. I said, if there are no further questions, I want to thank you all again for this wonderful presentation. I want to thank the audience who has participated. As I mentioned earlier, in a couple of weeks on the 20, well, actually that's the 25th, at 6 p.m., we're going to have a session, a show and tell genealogy show and tell session where you can join in this community. You can share how you've applied some of the lessons that we've learned tonight. If you have any case studies that you would like to discuss and interact with a group of individuals in a more intimate session, you're definitely welcome to join us. Our next workshop will be on July 13th, 5:30 p.m. with Renata Yarbrough Sanders, and this will be researching enslaved ancestors. You don't want to miss that workshop. Definitely sign up for it. Stay tuned to our social media platforms or any other upcoming programs. And again, thank you all for joining us, and you all have a great evening and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.